Welcome to the Mortal Realms in the Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the Age of Chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies through the wreckage of Excelsis this episode are...
Hey, I'm Paul, and Gorg Hunters, that reminds me of something. Generals gathered in their masses!
Nice.
All right.
Nice. I am Josh, and just like the Kruleboyz, we're going to swamp you with wonderful lore and bog you down with the awesome background of the Orruk Warclans.
Nice.
And I'm Davy, standing in for Aaron. And guys, I got a question for you. What do you call a group of singing gut rippers on a boat?
Oh, did I already? I don't know. What do you call them?
A cruel croon cruise crew.
Oh, nice.
Nice. I like it.
In this episode, we cover the lore of the Orruk Warclans Battletome. Get ready to hear a whole lot of Smashin, Bashin, and Excelsis Crashin. And then if we have time after all that, we'll talk about those Kruleboyz. How are you doing tonight, boys? I gotta figure out how to make sure everyone can hear the Z when I'm pronouncing my plurals in this episode. How are you doing tonight, boys? It's perfect. That's gonna be fresh all episode long. What's going on? I'm going to see if I can interrupt you answering this question as many times as possible. Just get the chaos going.
TM. I am doing fantastic. I'm super excited to record an episode. So,
Likewise. Yeah, it's been a while for me, so I'm super happy to get a chance to read through this and contribute.
Yeah, we should address the elephant in the room. Aaron has quit the cast. He just can't take it anymore. We've abused him too many times. No, he's got family obligations of a good kind, so we're giving him the night off, night off in so much as he won't be sleeping for quite some time. But
yeah, he's got a mammoth task ahead of him. Sure.
Yeah, I know. He's made the error like Paul has made in getting himself outnumbered in his household. So
exactly,
happy error. Anyway, what have you guys been up to?
Josh, why don't you go ahead? We haven't heard from you in forever.
Yeah, the list should be so very long.
I've been working on some terrain, getting my 3D printer back up and going. I've actually been enjoying the Mansions of Madness board game, so I painted up some figures for that.
All right.
Nice.
And I've also been, Pavin and I have got some ideas in the works for Dogs of Warcry, so I've been assembling a portion of the Kruleboyz so that we could try out that Kruleboyz Age, Stormcast campaign that Games Workshop put out. So we're going to try that for Warcry and then be able to give at least a review of it, how it went for us. So yeah, a lot of fun things in the works.
Tasty. Nice. What about you, Paul?
Well, I am still plugging along on my Hardcover force. I have 4 figures left to finish 1,000 points of painted, so that makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
But I've been distracted, as so often happens with me, and have started assembling a Living City Dawnbringer Crusade.
Wow.
And getting super into my conversions in it. So I'm super excited to reveal that in the relatively near future.
Awesome.
Are you have you been nervous about making your first conversions ever?
Yes. I mean, it's super weird.
Yeah. It sounds right in character for you. Myself, I actually finished my Eyes of the Nine warband, and these were converted up. They're the Eyes of the Cabal because I used Corvus Cabal bits on them. I noticed that Vortimus has got that one wing, and I thought I wanted to lean into that whole vibe. I was pretty happy with it. As usual, like the execution didn't quite match what I hoped for, but I was still pretty happy with it. So
they look great.
I see some pictures.
Yeah. Thanks. I threw them up and got some good comments back, so that's cool. I did some objectives for Vint. He needed some he went to I want to say Blood in the Badlands. That's not Brew City Brawl. I know there's a lot of B's in there, but he was short some objectives, so I did up some of the terrain pieces that I had from Night Vaults. They kind of those floating gems or whatever.
Yeah, nice. I like those.
Yeah, I got really lucky. I did like it was a technique that I didn't intend to do, but I did like the what the contrast undercoat, like
Mhm.
gray sear, and then I just like put a heavy coat, but it's a real broad flat surface, and so then it was all kind of like not quite marbleized, but almost like a watercolor effect on there.
Nice.
But then when you kind of make the rest of it a little more edge highlighted around it, it creates sort of a contrast in textures, even though it's totally flat. So one of those things that looks good and was totally unintentional. I thought I was just trying to shade something and did a very bad job. But what's Bob Ross's thing? Happy accidents, something like that.
Right.
Mhm.
So,
Exactly.
happy accidents.
That's funny because I have those exact same terrain pieces, and I did the exact same thing with the contrast to make it kind of pool in the middle to give it a bit of a sense of depth. So
Ooh, all right.
now I feel like I have to edge highlight the outside of the panels to make it look better.
We should compare. We should see how it turned out. The various, because I was not trying to pull. I was trying to pull at the edges. So
Ooh, nice.
yeah, perimeter
Cool.
inimical, so to speak.
Nice. I like it.
And then we can say this because Aaron's not here, but I caved a little bit, and I actually I've assembled some kill team Deathcore
Ooh.
Krieg. Just really like
Ooh.
the models a lot. So
Mhm.
we'll see.
Nice.
We'll see where that goes. But I got warbands to do. I got other stuff to do. I was thinking about Slaanesh today and maybe figuring out somebody to run me through some Path to Glory, some kind of small thing. So lots of options.
Well,
Or
I am all in on Path to Glory, so
We know.
that's
That
what I
is
hear.
awesome.
Yeah.
yeah, you are more than welcome to hit me up when I have a chance, and I
Okay.
will. I've already got 2 different campaigns going, and I'm about to start a third. So
Wow.
This guy.
I got to get my
Hobby
Hadron
hero.
in there then.
yeah, I've been super lucky. Will Sever, friend of the show, has been coming over to my house and playing like once a week, and I was able to actually get out of the house on Sundays when Vince started his Path to Glory League. So I've got probably 15 to 20 games in. And then
Wow.
Paving came over on Saturday, which was amazing. And we played in my driveway.
Mhm.
So like I've been like getting hobby overload with like getting games in. It's amazing.
Sounds
And he
excellent.
actually gave me some really nice advice on my conversions for my Living City army too. So I'm super pumped.
I would take Paven's advice on anything. That guy.
Exactly. Like I know you came over here to play games, but come tell me how to do my army better, please.
Well, we need to talk some war clans. Paul, you want us to lead us into story phase here?
Sure. The story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the 9 realms. The throaty roar of the Orruk resounds across the realms. It is a challenge to every other living creature, and in the era of the beast, it is louder than ever.
Very nice.
All right. Well, we're gonna get straight down to business. We got to talk the W's, right? So this is it's been a little bit since we did a battle tome. You guys were doing Broken Realms there, and so for those not familiar, we kind of match it, but we'll be following some of our usual. And then Paul's done a good job. We got some listener questions, so we're gonna try and hit those as we go through. So who they are, who is actually getting covered here in this. I know it kind of says it on the cover, but if you're brand new to this game, what did you expect to be reading about in here, Josh?
The Oryx, which they continue to expand this race. I think in Age of Sigmar. So originally there were kind of the bone splitters from previous versions, and then the Iron Jaws were the big new faction, and now they've added Kruleboyz, and so they're all different aspects of Gorka Morka, which I think is interesting. The Gits are in a different battle tome, so this is just those particular green skins of a larger size. Although you could say Hobgrots are kind of in the middle somewhere, and they kind of fall into the Kruleboyz.
Are they even green?
But,
what's going on?
Yeah.
Questions. More at 9. All right, so that's what we're talking about. Where do they come from? Like, so we'll give the let's talk about like kind of the racial origin, but then like, where do little Orruks come from as well, Paul?
So they kind of come from all over the realms. We've had this understanding for Age of Sigmar that orcs are just kind of here, right? But the book really focuses on the three major types of orcs in the realms. So you got the savage orcs, the Kruleboyz, and the Iron Jaws. The savage orcs are also known as the Bone Splitters. And they do come from all over the realms, like most of the other races. And where little baby orcs come from is actually a matter of contention. As I'm going to hit it super early here, as the unreliable narrator of these battle tomes always comes in.
You're an unreliable narrator.
You're absolutely correct.
Or
That's the whole
reliable. It could be
You're
reliable.
reliably unreliable.
I'm reliably unreliable every single time. So there is definitely a head nod to the idea that orcs are spores or fungus. There's also a alternative theory that they reproduce like typical normal humans do as well. But there was a little fun thing where it described an orc dying.
Yeah, if
And
I find you
there
mean
was a-
gross, but carry on.
That's fair. There was a brand new word I actually had to look up.
Deliquescing? Deliquescing?
Yeah, deliquescing. I was like, what in the heck is that word? But it literally means to like rot into a liquid composition, basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if an oric's body is allowed to rot into a liquid composition, then apparently just little orics spring from it, according to the third theory, which I thought was like kind of super fun and ridiculous at the same time. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's one of those words that sounds like it means,
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right, exactly. This is out of Xantaster's Bestiary of Gur, and I didn't do the research to figure out if we've ever seen reference to that before. But I would like to see one of those published by GW at some point, like those what was the Chaos tomes they did, or like the some of the just pure background tomes they did back in the old world days. That'd be pretty fun.
So this actually is our first question from Discord. This is from the Forest Dissonance. Are they actually mushrooms? Yes.
Maybe?
Question mark?
Yeah.
It's one of the three theories, so definitely possible. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. They when they talk about like, do they reproduce in a more traditional way? It's like nobody's felt like getting close enough to check. I'm like, you can't tell me somebody hasn't like taken a peek on a battlefield at some point, like piles of dead orcs. Somebody's taken a, I don't know.
There's got to be orcs in kilts somewhere.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's orcs in loincloths, right? That's even less coverage than a kilt. So, anywho, let's move on from that.
Isn't the coverage we want to talk about in this episode?
Yeah. Orcs After Dark.
Let's see. How about where they call home? So, like another one of our W's. You said that they call every realm home. Are there any cool things you found about like places? Like, is there one place that's more home than others? And then what other cool like spots have you seen?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Obviously, the book does say that they're not found in Azir, so which makes sense. It kind of alludes. It doesn't directly say, but all the Orruks, all the kind of come from Gur. I think is where they all started, and then as they followed Gorka Morka, I think they spread throughout the realms after that. But I think a lot of the specific factions or unique factions that they describe in the book are kind of set in Gur, which makes sense. It's the realm of the beasts, and they've adapted to strive there.
There's a lot of Gur in this book. Like it comes up a lot, and I think at one point it's like no race more represents the raw bestial fury of Gur than the Orcs, and I can imagine like Bray herds in the background with a tear rolling down. Like, am I a joke to you? Like, what are you? But yeah, so obviously Gur heavy on home, but they're all over, right? Like we're seeing that.
Yeah, there's a couple references to Scrap a Spill, which is in the realm of metal in Ayada, and then there's also a couple references to Shyish, which is kind of fun. They've kind of gone the standard route of yes, they're from Gur, but here's a couple other interesting different takes on what their culture might look like if they were from a different realm. Which I super appreciate it. I always love those little diversions. So
yeah.
Definitely.
I'm gonna jump slightly ahead briefly because this is a note that we see later, and it revolves around place, and I really liked it, so I'm gonna steal it for myself because I'm hosting. Cool. You can't stop me. There was apparently there's a small society of Kruleboyz that are in Nurgle's garden. They apparently poisoned an area so bad that it ended them up in Nurgle's garden, but they're so like wily and crafty that they have their own like weird like devolved culture that is still existing. And Nurgle's like, yeah, pretty good, you guys. You can keep kicking it here. Which I thought was pretty fun. And having read the Garden, was it Garden of Nurgle? What was the
Plague Garden?
Plague Garden. Having read Plague Garden, I can buy it. Like Nurgle's Garden is a varied place. So
yeah,
really,
they basically just like were so into it that they brought Nurgle's Garden into the realms, and Nurgle just like, yep. Totally, I buy it. So it's one of those places where the realm is super thin. So
yeah, it was a cool point. But like you said, everywhere, Shyish, Nurgle's Garden. I want to know more about the underworlds that have been taken over by orcs.
Yep.
So
yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things. We're gonna get to those soon. Yeah, that's gonna be awesome.
So what else?
The book, we don't really know much about the Orruk afterlife, and a lot of the book kind of indicates that maybe they dissolve into this green energy and become part of Gorka Morka. But there's one a section of the book that talks about these Orruk paradises, because there have been Orruks seen in Shyish and some of the in the underworlds where the different gods and different paradises exist. But it goes on to say that Orruks are so well known for just randomly jumping into realm gates, even those with swirling ghostly faces, that they have just found underworlds and populated them, so they don't actually have a paradise there per se, but they've just taken it over as their own.
Right. I like that it kind of leaves it as like yeah, maybe there is one, or maybe it's just like these crazy dudes are flying into the realm of Shyish. I like that about them quite a bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One other point that they really bring up a lot in this book is that the Orruks are the children of Gorka Morka, who is the destruction god. And they talk about how Mork is really the one who is worshipped or embodied by the Kruleboyz. And Gork, who is fighty but cunning, is embodied by the Iron Jaws, whereas the Bone Splitters are Gorka Morka combined. So that'll be a theme that keeps popping up over and over again. So where do they come from? They definitely come from Gorka Morka. They come from this feeling of destruction and wanting to cast down societies and get into a big scrap all the time.
Yeah, that's kind of the overall rundown. Should we get into the history of these dudes?
Yeah. One thing, the details, the little like call outs in this book are fantastic. And before we get into the history of the race, there's 3 beasts that are named that I just want to know 700 more things about. One of them just says colossal insectoids are something that they deal with. Burrowing squig ticks, which sounds disgusting. And Myrmidon ants. So those are all things where, like, please tell me more. I want to know a lot more about these things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting fauna and creatures living in Gur. Sounds like.
Yeah, there's an interest, like they have these they have like the call out books. Do you guys notice there were like these little phrases, and I couldn't figure out how they decided when these phrases would go in. Sometimes they're attached to a picture, sometimes they're just at the bottom of a page. Like if you look at the end of page 13, it's like, if you grab a weakling, snap his neck. Like, and it's not on every page. Like I was flipping around and I could not figure out the rhyme or reason. There's one that's above a picture on page 19. Iron is good for crumping, but gold is naff all use. Like, and like they're just these cool sayings. They reminded me like of the if you're reading 40K stuff, they always have like the thought for the day scattered around.
Right.
This was like the Warclans thought for the day. It was really fun for some reason.
Chicken soup for the Orruk soul.
I liked it. I liked it.
Did you guys see this, or
I did.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you find any pattern to it?
No. It was literally just like, oh, he got some space.
Yeah.
The time of the Orruks, he's here, so you better watch it.
Cunning as a
there's
cruel
a
boy,
pattern
brutal
to
as a
it.
brute. Yeah. What?
It wouldn't be very orky.
Yeah. Right. Well, there's one, and this one seems attached to. This is the last one I'll mention for now, but like, there's a big gore grunt to charge, and over at the side of the picture, like turn side, it says "Respect the pig." I was like, all right. If you say so, I guess. All right.
Yeah. Well, there's a little reference to pig iron in the book too. That was
that's pretty
hilarious.
sweet. Yeah. I think I've seen that one in previous tomes. So it was as I was starting, like, I think I remember this and getting a chuckle out of it. Anyway, let's start where it always starts, in the Age of Myth. And here's, this is a spot where historically we've seen this where it splits up Age of Myth, Age of Chaos, Age of Sigmar, and in the past we've often seen this as here's some example battles that happened, and it's not that there's none of those, but by and large this section almost became a timeline, right? Like it's more of like a history written out, I think was you were saying,
Yep,
Paul. So there's a couple pieces, but I was a little sad because a lot of times I lean on this for like those tasty treats that they sometimes drop, which are like the little story hooks. Like, that's and there was a little less of that. On the other hand, if you're somebody who wants a more complete history of your faction, well, you've got it here. But anyway,
yeah. Well, so this ties into a thing we were talking about on one of the last Battletomes we talked about, where we're getting a new faction. The new faction is in an existing other two factions, and so we're getting more into the feeling of where we were in 7th and 8th edition for books, where we're reading through and trying to find those little bits of information that are new and that really can give us a little bit better understanding of things that are going to be a motive force or pushing the narrative ahead. And so the fun thing about this one is that we do have a completely new faction. So we've got a bunch of new lore to like go through, but the lore, because it's a third of the book, is kind of scattered into the other two factions as well. So the new faction, for those that don't know, is going to be the Kruleboyz. They were released with the Dominion box set, and they are a new kind of Orruk that we have not seen before. And so the Iron Jaws and the Savage Orruks have existed in the Age of Sigmar for a while, and we've already had Battletomes with their lore in it. And so we do have some updates for there, but most of the new stuff is going to be here in the Kruleboyz. And so this history of violence is what they call it, and this timeline is really kind of resetting and readjusting a little bit of what the timeline was before, because not only have we added in the Kruleboyz, but we've also added in Kragnos. So we've added in to the present, but we've also filled in some more of the background of the history of where the Orruks are and what's going on. And that, again, is going to be kind of a theme going through in this Battletome. So,
yeah, I haven't read any of the previous Battletomes for the Orruks. So definitely it was all fun and new for me. But cool. You guys will have to chime in where it's really different.
Yeah, definitely still enjoyable to read and to find those things. But I've read most of the other stuff, I think, the last time I read through the Orruk Battletome. But again, doesn't make it not interesting. And they do add some fun little bits to really bring out that flavor. So, so I'm going to go ahead and tackle the first little paragraph here, and called The Primal Times. And the only reason I'm going to bring this up is there's a question from Ned in our Discord, and it says, I just want to know if Beasts of Chaos are mentioned. And it says, quote, beast-headed nomad, and they get destroyed. So, yes, the Beasts of Chaos are mentioned. Moving on.
Yeah, it's I predicted that there'd be some story in here of them like dying by the thousands to like, just getting punked by Kruleboy traps or something like that. We didn't even really get that. They
No,
got
we didn't even
punked.
get that
but,
far. Like
they,
first entry,
they all
first
died off
paragraph.
screen basically. So yeah, pretty rough.
I love
Sorry,
it.
Ned. There's a couple more tastes from that book later. We'll hit those when they come by. Not much.
Yeah. The other kind of interesting thing is that
Yeah.
they moved on to the twin-tailed comet, which is one of the further entries. It talks about Sigmar is revived, but they've already mentioned that the humans are in the realms.
Yeah, it specifically says when the hairy, soft-skinned predecessors of mankind emerged from their caves. I was like, oh, I guess, huh? Like that's
So do we have evolution now?
Right? Like what?
Well, I don't know if it's evolution, but and I guess we really don't know how they all end up in the new realms, from the world that was.
Yeah.
Whether they were hiding out in the caves, or whether they actually evolved, or
Them using the word predecessor is what kind of introduced some question there. But anyway,
right.
Back here in the Age of Myth as well, there was the Drogruk of Dunce.
Mm-hmm.
That empire was doing it. We've heard about that empire before. You guys talked about the last remaining dude there, right?
Mm-hmm. Kragnos.
Yeah.
Yep.
They actually teamed up, right? They were the sworn enemies of Shaggoths. So there's another callback to the Beast of Chaos book. And the Thunderscorn Peaks, which no surprise, the Thunderscorn are from there, or hang out there, or got there as fast as they could. But it's this thing where they're teamed up with the Draconeth to wipe out these. It's interesting because both raise the Draconeth and the Drogruk both hate these guys. They're punking on the Shaggoths because they are centaurs and draconic in nature, but not quite good enough to be. I was like,
Well, they said they had some evil practices.
Yeah, that's true. But then Kragnos, for whatever reason, decides to pick a fight with the Draconeth, which may or may not have saved the Shaggoths unintentionally, but creates a big realm-spanning conflict, which ends up getting him imprisoned. And if you want to know more about that, go back to... Was any of this new to you, Paul? You're better with the Kragnos lore than I am.
Yeah, so they give kind of like a short summary of it here, but then they expand upon it a little bit in the Kragnos unit entry, but it's not that much extra. So the interesting thing is that we actually get the two new Stormcast dragons called out by name in this battle of the Shaggoths and the Draconiths and Kragnos. So the two dragons that we're getting in the Stormcast release were here in this battle in the Age of Myth. So they are as old as Kragnos, and we're renewing a rivalry that has laid dormant for, eons.
Sure.
So I thought that was a nice kind of touchstone and filling in of that. And it was also interesting because obviously they couldn't reveal that these two characters existed because the models hadn't been shown. But we only got this book 4 months ago, and already they're adding to the intro, adding to the lore. So I thought that was super cool, and that is something we definitely have never seen before. Battletome.
When you say we got this book 4 months ago, what book are you talking about? Oh, you're talking about
Kragnos.
Kragnos. Okay, all right.
Yeah. So Kragnos was introduced into the lore 4 months ago, ish, and now we're getting the Warclans Battletome, and his lore is already being updated to include 2 new models that we saw a month ago. So that was fun to have that filled in so quickly. And I know who those guys are, right? I already know who those models are. So that was something that never would have happened in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and it's wonderful to see this lore engine spinning up and starting to chug forward so quickly.
Yeah. Right. So that all goes down. We have the twin-tailed comet where Dracothian breathes life back into Sigmar. Sigmar arrives. Humans are already here. Gorkamorka is rampaging around. He's having a good time. He's finding all kinds of monsters to kill and all that sort of thing. But he wanders in. I do enjoy the name of this peculiar god beast known as Drakatoa, a shapeless landslide of sentient amber. That's a pretty like out there god beast as far as god beasts go. But he gets stuck in it and he can't club a pile of amber to death. So he's stuck there waiting until Sigmar comes and lets him out. And then Gorka Morka, as is his wont, is super mad about having been stuck for so long. And so he lashes out and he knocks out Dracothian Cold, which yikes.
Right.
I mean, it occurs to me, I remember this. I'm scanning it right now. It doesn't say this. I imagine he'd headbutted him, but it doesn't. That's my own headcanon there. Two heads are better than once. They do the thing where they brawl for a long time and then they laugh and recognize each other as worthy opponents. And Sigmar recruits Gorka Morka to be the roving monster slayer. And Gorka Morka's like, sweet, that's what I was going to do anyway.
Yeah.
And that's about as tight as that alliance gets, I think. So,
right.
Yeah. And we know some of the story beats from here on out, so we can kind of skim a little bit, I think. Paul, you want to kind of give us the broad strokes?
Yeah. So basically, we start out with this pantheon of order, pantheon of destruction and death that Sigmar has arranged. And as we all know by this point, it does fall apart. We have the Battle of the Black Skies. We have all of these definitive moments that really help us to define how the Age of Myth comes into its downfall.
Mm-hmm.
We did get one kind of cool detail, I thought, which is that when Gorka Morka is ending up being really frustrated with Sigmar, he goes and wanders to the edge of the realm, and then he spits off of the realm's edge.
Turns around, heads back.
Yeah, well, which to me is super interesting because when Slaanesh did that, we got Dexessa and Celcessa. We got the twins in the Broken Realms. So what is going to happen? Like that to me feels like a plant that we're going to get something coming in the future, which is the offspring of the spit of a god, right? So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, could be.
And the other thing is that we've talked about Gorka Morka and we've talked about Gorkan Work, and I don't think I actually went through and defined what that means. So Gorka Morka is such a destruction-based god that he even fights with himself. And when he fights with himself, he literally splits into two. So he splits into Gork and Mork. But then, of course, they all end up making up and then joining back together into Gorka Morka again.
And he's a two-headed god.
Correct.
So
And then the last kind of entry we have in the Age of Myth is that we have the Kruleboyz showing up way after the Pantheon is divided and moving into the Age of Chaos. So we do have them planted as being here for quite a long time.
Yeah. Little retconny. They're super sneaky. I think the other piece I didn't quite remember, and this is probably on me, I didn't realize that Gorka Morka and his war clans had briefly joined up with Sigmar for the Battle of Burning Skies, kind of the last dying of the light before Age of Chaos. But Age of Chaos comes nonetheless. And it's really awful for humans and order and all that. Not so bad for the Greenskins.
Yeah.
Fighting's all you want to do.
Yeah.
It works out well.
I like again and again of an entry like this bad thing happened, and but actually it was pretty sweet for the orcs because they were like, oh yeah, we get to fight. So.
We did get, I think it was a new detail here, is that Archaon tries to take Gur and fails. And then we get this little story of Darkhorn the Devourer, which is a Chaos hero, and his skull is adorning the Varen Spire now. So
yeah, you're in for trouble. You're basically a Chaos red shirt if you're a name we haven't heard of before, and you are getting sent to go take on the protagonist of the army book. It's not going to go well. Not going to work out for you.
I am definitely going to have to use that. The Chaos red shirt. That's a wonderful term.
And then there is the Garden of Theory, and this is what I want. This is the thing we already talked about, where they end up making a home territory in the Garden of Nurgle. Like that's the kind of hooks I really enjoy in this. And so this is one of the juiciest ones that we had in here.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're like, oh, Nurgle was so impressed. He used them as their, test subjects and gave them lots of diseases, and they're still there.
Yeah. Their twisted society still ekes out a life there to this day. Oof. But something's got to break up the fun. And it is Sigmar and a Stormcast Eternals, a quick 500 years later, come crashing in. And guess what? It's a good thing. New dudes to fight. Oh, yeah.
They're happy. They're excited.
And this is where one of our best known Age of Sigmar Ironjaws gets his start, and that's Gordrak, right?
Correct.
He there's the god beast Fangathrak. We know about this, right? This is the god beast that has it's a giant worm with a gate in its mouth, right?
Correct.
A realm gate in its mouth, and that's kind of pivotal to Gordrak's rise to power.
Yeah, it's the Pits of Gorentia, which is Spiderfang, which I always love.
Yeah.
And so we're introduced to him in the crawling pits of Gorentia, and he does manage to get through a storm vault in the bottom to get the first of three things that he's supposed to get. So he's got this magic item. He's got the skull of the bull-headed god beast Hammergord, and he first sets his eyes on the city of Excelsis. So we're pulling this narrative right into the current time, starting with Age of Sigmar, which is cool. There was a little bit about a thing called the Rucka Snork Stampede, which is basically just a bunch of mounted orcs going crazy and doing stuff. But we did get a mention and a call out of two free cities of Sigmar called Blackwall and Taberna, which I don't know if we've heard from before. So that was kind of a nice little call out of new civilizations.
Probably not, because they got stampeded.
Yeah.
R.I.P.
Worst things can happen in Age of Sigmar. Getting stampeded is actually, quick and just painless, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right. Good point. Especially with some of the descriptions of the Kruleboyz and what they like to do.
Ooh, yeah. Well, yeah, that's a theme.
And so one of our next significant occurrences in the history of the realms is the Necroquake comes rumbling through, and there's of course there's a whole bunch of ghosts go flying all over the place, and Ironjaws think it sucks that it's something that doesn't break when you hit them. The Kruleboyz like, we're gonna go find more rewarding prey. But this is where the Bone Splitters get their chance to shine. They call it the Death Storm, right? And there's one particular war clan that is particularly well suited for this. That's the Drakfoot, and we'll talk about them a little bit more. They've kind of cut their teeth fighting demons of Khorne based on where they're at. So they're used to fighting stuff that, frustratingly enough, does not give up any bones. when you're Bone Splitters, you got to have those bones. But I like that their name for these are spooks, of course, with a Z, spooks. And they decide, like, it's our job to kind of root these out so that we can get back to the real business of scooping up sweet bones. And kind of similar to when we did the Dominion episode, where the Sigmarites ended up being able to kind of fight off some of the Banshees once they just kind of believed hard enough.
Yep.
I mean, that's what the Bone Splitter is all about. They just believe, like, yeah, of course we can chop these things. We're awesome. And so they do,
Well, and that's a recurring theme in the Orruk lore, is that if the Orruks believe something hard enough, they can kind of make it happen. So, yeah.
It does say, it says it ultimately saves their allies, the Gargan Scions of Behemoth, from a plague of fear that would otherwise have scarred the collective psyche of their kind.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, nice save.
So
That's cool.
Yeah, there was a big story in the Sons of Behemoth Battletome where as soon as that happened, they were like, I'm going to step on this thing. And nothing happened because it's a ghost.
Yeah.
And they thought they were invincible. And then all of a sudden they see a Mega Gargan go down. they're like, oh, what, they can hurt us,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't hurt them. And so the rest of his tribe like flees.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And then they tell other tribes, and basically the entire Gargant race just starts to believe that they can't actually defeat these ghosts. And it turns into like this rout of like, they just don't know what to do until one of them is fighting with the Drakfoot, and he's like, oh, they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they can do it, they're smaller than I am. Of course I can do it. And then he just starts stomping on him, and then the Night Haunt just absolutely get obliterated. And then he goes and tells his friends, like, oh, no, all you have to do is just, like, believe that you can do it, basically, and it's totally fine. And that was it. Like, literally, it was a much better told story than that brief reverie. But, literally is, the Drakfoot did save the Gargant race from extinction, basically.
Yeah. That was fun to see that reiterated here.
Mm-hmm.
So we, that's the get through that, and now we're entering. It's kind of a sub age of the Age of Sigmar. I don't know if this is defined as its own, right? Like we are about to enter the Age of the Beast.
Well, Age of Beast is definitely a new thing.
Okay,
and we were in the Time of Tribulations or Soul Wars, and that has ended.
I'm just wondering, like sometimes those are all like these are all under the heading of Age of Sigmar, and so I just wonder for etymological, or I'm probably not using that right.
So yeah, we're still in the Age of Sigmar, but
taxonomic, is that what I'm
yeah, probably
the taxonomy of this time.
Yeah. Oh, etymological.
I'll just mash all this together in one super edit and make us look super dumb using all these words wrong. Anyway,
sounds good. But Age of Sigmar up to the Time of Tribulations is Age of Sigmar 1.0. And then the Time of Tribulations Soul Wars is 2.0. And the Age of Beast is now 3.0.
I'm more going at what in universe they'd call it, unless you think they're, Sigmar is like, welcome to 3.0, boys. Because I don't, do they in universe they refer to the Age of Chaos? Age of Myth, Age of Chaos. Those feel like terms that they would actually use.
Yep.
But, and so I'm just wondering, like, in universe, do they consider Age of Sigmar to encompass these later things, the Time of Tribulations, or are they separate and distinct? Like the Age of Sigmar happened, and then there was the, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's a side ponder. Right,
Fair.
Right now, the way the book writes it, it's the Age of Sigmar contains the like Time of Tribulations and Age of Beasts are subsets of the Age of Sigmar, but maybe it's not super important.
Mark 3.14567 start date.
Gold.
Nice.
And then again, this is a territory we've gone over before because it's in Kragnos. How Kragnos is busted out of, was it Twinhorn Peak? Am I remembering? Yep. Goes on a rampage. Links up with Gordrak. They go after Excelsis. Again, if you want to know all the sweet deets, go back to the episode that these cool cats did when they covered Broken Realms Kragnos. And then I think where it picks up the pieces that we might not know starts at a section called Return to Fangathrak. Since this is getting back into the pits, we got to give it to Paul. Anything spider adjacent, we got to hand his way.
I know, right?
Contractually obligated.
So basically, we get a little bit of a Princess Bride moment. All right, we have to go back to the beginning. So Gordrak goes back to the pits of Garantia, where he started to find his mojo, and he goes and he binds that god beast worm using the Arachnaroks that are now basically like his best buds because he has subdued them in the past. And so he binds the worm, and then he binds its mouth open, and then barrels his way through the realm gate into the 8 points, followed by a massive force of Spiderfang as well.
He uses himself as bait to trick Fangathrak into a whole bunch of webs.
Well, into the chasm too, and the chasm closes around the worm because
Right.
it's because all of Gur is alive and sentient.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this could set up a Paul theory. Do you have one?
I mean, so Josh put this one in here, so I'll let him do it. My poll theory is a little bit different.
Yeah. No, I just read that that a large contingent of Spider-Fang were impressed with Gordrak and followed him through. And of course, the Warcry teaser we had this last weekend, it's got lots of innuations of spiders and teasing. So whether this is related to that, they came in and he's now in the 8 points, or it's something different.
Yeah, we'll see. So I might as well document my my theory as well. So in the video, they've got this,
if you're allergic to like super crazy, then you might want to set aside your headphones for the next 90 seconds or so.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I joke, but you might actually have something with this anyway.
So in Wrath of the Everchosen, we have Catacross going into the 8 points, and Lady Olinder is actually attacked by spiders in what's called the Forest of Eyes, and they have what are called Soul Eater spiders, which I have to assume is some specific type of spider on their way. And then Catacross himself goes into the Varen Spire itself and just starts rampaging through this industrial region of the city, which is run by Chaos Warden. And the video shows these like almost oil rigs that seem to be pumping up Varanite. And if we combine those two things together, we could get the Soul Eater spiders versus the Chaos Warden in the caverns beneath the Varen Spire, and kind of fit all the theories. And they have reached back into Wrath of the Everchosen a couple times to make the story move forward. So that's definitely a possibility, although Josh definitely has a great possibility here as well. I'm not going to be disappointed in anything that gets us new spiders. So
the symbol's different too. So it's not quite Spider-Fang. So it's definitely different.
But my theory is that that's the new Chaos Warden 8-pointed Chaos Star, but it's not a star because it's a gear to represent their like industrial nature. But that's just a theory. So
sure,
that's a good one.
Yeah. Quite a scry. I think we've got a question here that kind of fits in well. Matt from the Set the Temple blog wants to know, how does the banishing of Kragnos affect the war clans after the siege of Excelsis? Does Gordrak take back control of the clans, or is his power lessened after ceding some control to Kragnos? Or did none of the Orruks notice?
So I think this is a good question to ask when we get to the end. Is a follow-up question to this one. So the banishing of Kragnos affect the war clans after the siege of Excelsis. We start to get this two-headed approach. So we just talked about how Gordrak went to the pits of Gorentia, but Kragnos himself actually ends up in a chaos fort, basically. Does Gordrak take back controls of the clans? Yes, he does. Is his power lessened after ceding some control to Kragnos? Absolutely. Did none of the Orruks notice? Oh, the Orruks definitely noticed. But that follows directly into, we're going to talk about the Mouth of Mork, which is the next little story here, which is Gobsprak on his corpse vulture. So he enlists Kragnos in this Chaos Fort after he's done rampaging through it, in the Dreadspine Fortress of Chaos. And he shows up after the fighting of Excelsis. He doesn't even bother going to Excelsis because he knows that Kragnos is going to end up here. And then
that's a great scribe by him.
Right?
Where he's going to end up.
And he can somehow speak the language of Kragnos. And so he is the Mouth of Mork, but he also is the mouth of Kragnos. And Kragnos gives him his full support. So that's kind of a cool little update on the story, because this is post the Kragnos Broken Realms book.
Yeah. And I think if, this is a little bit with this where, if you're looking for what things have cascaded on from the Siege of Excelsis, there's, it pops up in a few spots, like the Kruleboyz shamans having pilfered glimmerings and then that's helping
Mm-hmm.
their ability to kind of foresee the future and that sort of thing. I thought that was kind of a cool little uh, toss to continuity there. It was
Mm-hmm.
all right. So.
Yep. Yeah. Josh, do you want to talk about the Amberstone floods?
Yeah, this is a little fun tidbit that's also kind of, I couldn't tell if it was during the Siege of Excelsis or it was after, but essentially the Kruleboyz had worked hard to poison the surrounding land with this toxic swamp water. And because Gur is alive, they were hoping that if they poison enough area around Excelsis, that Thondia would decide to slough off the city to get rid of this nastiness and
Mm-hmm.
just it would be gone. Because there's this reoccurring theme throughout that the continents of Gur are all alive, and how the Gur itself took a bite out of its moon, and there's all sorts of really interesting tidbits of how it's alive and the world spirit, so to speak. And this was another example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets us up to the current state of affairs in Age of Sigmar. And we got anything else they want to talk about the history, or should we jump on to organization here?
I'm gonna jump on the organization, and if you don't mind, we're gonna take one note here. We're gonna kind of focus on the Kruleboyz,
Mm-hmm.
since the Iron Jaws and the Savage Orcs, we've kind of seen them before.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a couple little details, some of those little fun extensions of the lore to talk about there. So, but yeah, we're gonna start with the Kruleboyz and kind of move forward from there.
Yeah, the faction, as we've mentioned, kind of three big splits: Kruleboyz, Bone Splitters, Iron Jaws. And actually, each of those are split into three kind of famed sub factions. Although I think you're more than welcome to create your own, but those are the ones that have rules and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
it's more complicated than three sets of three. They're all kind of split in different ways. Um, but yeah, we'll start with the Kruleboyz. There's a cool aside here. There's some talk about what what the Kruleboyz have been up to. Here's some more facts about their physiology and such. So let's run through some of the quirks, interesting
Mm-hmm.
factoids we hear about them before we really kind of get into what those sub factions are and what their different uh, organizational quirks are. Paul, why don't you run us through some of those?
So basically, we've got the Iron Jaws and the Savage Orcs, and the Iron Jaws really are just a hammer. They do have some tactics, but they're just going to run up and they're just going to smash things, right? That's kind of what they do. Um, and then we've got the Savage Orcs, and they're more of a nomadic tribe where they go and they try and take down the biggest beast that they can. They believe that the bones of monsters and the bones of Gur give them power. So the Kruleboyz are just like almost the complete opposite of both of those. They are this race that lives in the bogs and the swamps, instead of a race that seems to enjoy battle. They seem to enjoy torture. Um, a lot of these unit entries, a lot of the things we're going to talk about are about them doing just straight up evil things. There is a lot of I want to witness the pain or witness the pain or enjoy the pain
Mm-hmm.
of my victims. I
Mm-hmm.
want to um, watch them suffer, even if it's not at my hands. If I get to watch them, like that's kind of good enough. And so the Kruleboyz are Oryx that do still have, a little bit of might makes right. We have Kilobosses that are kind of the leaders who are the biggest and the baddest, and we've got these Swamp Kala Shamans, which are the magical leaders as well. And we do have this organization where we've got these little tribes that they are organized into, where some of them are going to be a little bit shooty, some of them are going to be more focused on beasts. Um, but a lot of their background is about trapping and torturing and just messing with everyone else, by and large. And as part of that, they don't want to be the showy, flashy guys on the battlefield. They don't want their fortresses to be these big things that stand as a bulwark against the darkness. They literally just want to slip into the shadows and have you never see them coming. And if they can win the battle before they actually have to get in close, well, that's the best result of all. And as part of that, they are constantly surrounded by this fog of the miasma of the swamps or the fog. Just this very vision reducing system. And the overarching goal is to extend the swamps and the bogs that they live in to remove the possibility of anyone else being able to survive there. So that'd be kind of my like big overview of who these guys are.
Yeah.
Pretty solid. They really lean into what these guys. So there's a lot, and this being the new faction, they spend a little more time on these guys. But to be fair, if you're new to Orruk Warclans in general, there's still plenty of time spent on the other factions as well. But like Paul said, we're leaning into the new stuff. But I'll talk Grinning Blades here. So
cool.
They're the largest war clan. And these are the ones that have scooped up a lot of the glimmerings that we mentioned earlier. So their swamp collar shamans are a little more powerful. They're really lined up with Gobsprak and then by extension Kragnos, because those two are kind of rolling together right now. Gobsprak's gotten in tight with Kragnos, and to me that, until reading the book, it felt a little out of character that why are the Kruleboyz like all in with this big sort of roaring force of nature guy that's kind of rampaging around. And for them, it seems like it maybe makes sense because they've got somebody to do the smashing up front, like brutal work. And that's what they want. They want somebody to like draw attention, to do all the heavy lifting, and then they'll kind of sneak in once he's battering rammed his way in through whatever. Then they kind of sneak in behind and start sowing the seeds of discord on top of whatever they've already done in preparation. So it made a little more sense.
Is that the Mortal Realms Discord?
Yeah, sure. Right. Join now.
www.themortalrealms.com/discord.
Yeah, actually, Aaron would love it if you came and joined us. If you're not already on our Discord, you should. We're almost at 500, and 500 gets him those sweet, juicy stats that he can crunch numbers with. I don't know if it changes anything for the rest of us, but think of it as a gift to him. Yeah, so that's what those guys lean into. They're kind of I don't know if I want to say the default, but kind of the default, like them.
Yeah.
So
I would say that.
Big Yeller's another one. Where are they from?
Yeah, so they're from the realm of metal, shaman, and they're kind of the opposite of the Grinning Blades, where they're funny. They're super lazy. They're so lazy that they develop better technology that's more efficient. so they've got the most range. The Death Spikas tribe. They've got the most of those, and they're very efficient weapons. They're using rafts and skiffs. They've even taken over cog forts and orcified them. And they use drawbridges and wheels and windmills, and they're very mechanically inclined because they're so lazy. So it was really funny descriptions there. Go ahead.
Oh, I just really enjoyed the orcified cog forts had winch-driven mega choppas.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that, dude.
I know, right?
Rumble along.
Steam-powered dreadnought sort of thing.
So,
but yeah, they also mentioned the big yellows interacting with what was that, scrap a
spill. Yep.
Yes, thank you. And having Kahadran scrap flotillas and things like that. So it's like, there's another reference of them.
Yeah.
Caradon are really letting some of those sky ships fall into the wrong hands here.
Right.
A few too many times. Gonna create a problem.
Tell us about the Skullbugs.
All right. So these are usually my favorite. The Skullbugs are the poisoners, and they are from Shyish. Or at least they came from Shyish. They hail from the mangrove forest of Chitinia, which is a fun wordplay. So I appreciate that, Phil Kelly or whoever wrote that. It was an underworld that was once a haven for those who welcomed the insect as a symbol of industriousness and strength, which that word completely makes sense. And like, there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It just seems like the weirdest sentence to me. Like, it makes sense in an Age of Sigmar way, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Um,
Well, I mean, you think of like a colony of ants and like how much they can lift relative to their size and how much they can get done. Like, I buy it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, just like the idea that there's an underworld of people who are like, I love
Right,
these
right.
guys so much.
Yeah, fair.
In my death, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go live with the insects. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Speaking of the insects, they call out 3 of them here: megapedes, which those seem like the things that we have on the Trogoths for Gloomspite Gits. Mork skeeters, sounds even worse than mosquitoes, and Rhinox beetles, which also sound massively dangerous.
Isn't that what Alariel rides on? Right, Rhinox beetle.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And their swamp calla shamans. This is, I thought, interesting. Drove out the native spirits. So does this mean that the Kruleboyz actually completely took over this underworld to the point where there was no undead in this underworld and they just took everything?
We're squatting here. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, yeah, definitely.
I thought that was an interesting call out. And the Spider Fang like them a lot, but the Skullbugs view spiders as, quote, not proper bugs. So they despise the Spider Fang. So that was a fun little call out as well.
Yeah. So that's they're kind of laid out like that. There's those are the sub factions. They're also like set up into different tribes that have different roles on the battlefield. And do we talk about those a little bit later? I mean, generally speaking, like each of the factions or each of the battlefield roles fall into different tribes. Like the
Here,
I don't know.
I've got it all in front of me now. So
Go for it.
All right. So in addition to these 3 war clans, we also have these tribes. So we've got the Bad Stabbas tribe, which is the Killaboss, the Swamp Calla Shamans, the Merc Knobs, and the Gut Rippers. So the Gut Rippers are the basic battle line troops with the spears and the scare shields. And that tribe is where basically most of the leaders come from, until we get to the Git Snatches tribe, which are like basically the Beast Wranglers. So those include the Marsh Crawler Slogoth, the Snatcha Boss, and the Swamp Boss. So those are the guys that are riding things a bit. And then we've got the Beast Breaker tribe, which has a Breaker Boss, which is on a different type of beast, a Myrebrute Trogoth. And then the Death Spikers tribe, which are the Beast Skewer Killbow, and the Man Skewer Bolt Boys. So those are the archers of the clans. So, and then we've got the auxiliaries, which are everything else: Hobgrots, Grots, and, quote, other hangers on and chattel.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. Like, you're in a tribe, but then that's like separate from whatever sub faction you're in. So that's kind of interesting way to
war
split.
clan is formed of all the different tribes all working together, kind of. And I did mention that the Git Snatchers were like they harvest raw materials from animals, people, and then figure out how they're used, and they make potions and then use them for like taming and things like that. So they also sounded like they're more resourceful sort of group.
Yeah.
But a lot of the torturing, I think, also falls underneath their belt.
Yeah. Let's talk Hobgrots for a second, right? Like, they're defined as bigger than Grots, smaller than Orcs, but they're specifically chilling with the Kruleboyz to act as intermediaries. Like, it's their specific role. They're intermediaries with Chaos Duarden, who are mentioned pretty explicitly here. and they need to be intermediaries because the Chaos Dwarden won't talk to the Kruleboyz after the War of the Broken Promise.
Right.
Mhm.
Is that new? I didn't. I
Yes.
wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't had any canon mention of Chaos Warden besides the Warcry model.
Yeah.
Right.
Except in Hobgrots, and we definitely have not had a mention in any other place of Hashit. Which is
Right.
specifically called out that these Chaos Warden worship Hashit.
Yeah.
Which, for those who have no idea what I'm talking about, and it makes no sense, in the old Warhammer Fantasy, the
Paul's
Chaos
putting on his
Dwarves,
giant hat right now.
I am putting on a massive hat, and I've got a wonderful, luxurious beard as well. And Hashit is a bull god of chaos that was not one of the 4 major gods of chaos, but kind of like a sub god. He was represented by the bull, and so there was a lot of different bull motifs and bull elements, and that's why the Chaos Dwarves had bull centaurs. So we're definitely seeing a reintroduction of old lore into canon for AOS. So that was definitely a cool shout out.
Yeah.
Part of this relationship is funny though, because the Hobgrots are, they retain as part of their kind of finder's fee for being these intermediaries. They keep some of the weapons themselves. So some of the bombs and stuff that they get to use in the game are specifically, and they're like, yeah, we got the good stuff. And it mentions how the Chaos Dwarden are like, we gave them the stuff that like just our amateurs, our starting out apprentices made. Nobody should actually want these because they're so terrible. But the joke is that the slaves that the Kruleboyz have traded them are the most sickly and worst slaves. So like, give them the worst slaves. So each side is like convinced they're getting one over on the other side.
Yeah.
I guess is how all good negotiations go. How all bad
exactly.
negotiations. I don't know.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. So.
And then kind of a couple more details here is that some of the Kruleboyz can survive completely submerged in the swamps for extended periods.
Yeah, calls them partially aquatic. Pretty interesting.
Especially the swamp colors in particular.
Yeah. And when they build their fortresses, their natural features become part of the defensive abilities. So like tree top gantries, crawlways, and caves or hollows. So I thought that was super cool. And then not only do they live in the swamp, but like they're basically swamp rangers, if we're going to use a D&D term. Like they have a very intentional and intense knowledge of fauna and situational awareness for living in bogs. And so I kind of mentioned how one of their things is that they mess with other people through the swamps, and so they'll lead them on like these merry trails through the swamps just to get them to quicksand, right? Or just to get them to tar mud, and watch them suffer and slowly die. They did also have a cool mention of something called funnel jaw spiders, which of course I thought was super cool. And they talk about how they've had interactions with Git mob bosses, which I thought was cool as well, because that's a faction we haven't seen before. But I think it ties into here. Another question from Ned. Do the Kruleboyz have any grudges against one of the other alliances? I feel like Malarian's forces would be kind in the same vein as them in the similar tactics. So it's not called out that they have anything against them, because we haven't heard anything about them. But oh my goodness, are they like totally against the Dawners? And by totally against, like super fans of them wandering into the swamps so they can watch them die over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Like it seems like that's kind of part of the reason why the Kruleboyz are coming out now, because they're like, oh, sweet, we get to kill all these people. And like one of their favorite things is to watch them come in shiny armor and with shiny arms, and watch their weapons drop into the swamp and make the people watch them dissolve or like fall in, knowing they'll never come back. Right?
Yeah. There was an interesting piece. It's kind of parallel to that. It was the how Kruleboyz are kind of they're not materialistic, right? Like they're easy come, easy go. Like there's no point in having something shiny because that just encourages somebody to like try and steal it off you, or you might drop it in the swamp and lose it. So like things are useful. It's useful to have a spear. But if you lose it, then you're gonna make another one pretty quick. They're good at making things, and they'd rather them be kind of like a little rundown, and not attract attention, all that sort of thing. So
and it feeds into their philosophy of taking down something nice or perfectly made, or that other people have done. Like, you're showing off. We're gonna show you and destroy everything you just did. So
yeah, and they're just all throughout this. You can almost see like you can almost read what some of the design brief must have been, because they talk about like the gut rippers use spears, and spears keep them safer, right? Like, that's why they don't use a choppa, because you can poke someone from a safer distance away, and like, you're like, oh, right. Like, and I'm sure when they were talking about this is what this faction is, and they were reasoning what weapons would they carry. It was kind of fun to like almost kind of read between the lines and see how they came up with some of these models.
Yep.
Yeah, one aspect I thought I'd mention here is, in each faction they kind of talk about how are they structured for battle and and that sort of thing. But I thought the one for the Kruleboyz is really well done. It's called the Claw, and it's just essentially a 5-fingered hand. But the way they describe some of them are just absolutely hilarious. Like, the leader's at the thumb, and so they say everyone else is under the thumb, which is
yeah.
And I thought it was hilarious that they mentioned the middle finger is the group that's supposed to go insulting people and rile them up.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, oh, well done and tongue in cheek. It was great.
Yeah, I did jump to that. Like after I read the thumb, I'm like, oh, I wonder if they do. They're like, yeah, they nailed it. All right, cool.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
That's a big kind of look over the Kruleboyz, and we'll kind of give a quick run through on the Iron Jaws and the Bone Splitters here. So the Iron Jaws. They're also kind of nomadic. It mentions a couple times. This is something we do know this, but they make their armor by punching it into shape, which I don't know about the physics of that, but fine. And so they punch their armor into shape, and it says like it sounds real frustrating, but they kind of see it as a fight, like they're fighting the piece of metal, and so that's pretty fun for them. Go ahead.
And a lot of it is because they believe that they can do it, right? It's not that like a normal person would be able to punch metal and shape it, but I think a lot of it comes from like, oh yeah, I can punch this, and it'll turn into something useful, and it won't actually get weaker, because they talk about it later. Like, you would think if you just punch something, it would just make the metal super weak. No, not with these guys.
Yeah. And then important is their relationship with Kragnos here, right? Like they respect him because he's big and tough, but they're not going to admit that he's more powerful than Gordrak, because they can't admit that anyone's more powerful than an Iron Jaw. So
I thought that was hilarious.
Refusing to concede that point. Yeah, I mean, basically their whole section is summed up by brute force and ignorance, which is pretty great. So, but I think the other iconic part for them is that the more they fight, the bigger they get, right? Like that's they thrive off conflict. And I think one of the first times we kind of saw these guys was real early on in Age of Sigmar, like where it was like, oh, the first brutes kind of appeared because they'd been fighting chaos for 500 years. And so when the Sigmarites returned, when the Stormcast Eternals arrived, they're like, oh snap, some of these guys are real big because they've been fighting so long. I think there's even a part of the Hunt for Manfred series where there's some like really, really, really big ones that show up, like kind of almost God Beast size. But
yep.
Anyway, Josh, you want to run down Bone Splitters for us?
Yeah. So they're a very interesting faction, very kind of infused with the spirit of Gorka Morka, and believe that there's a world spirit, and they kind of in touch with the ley lines of the different realms, the geomancy, and as Davy mentioned, they kind of travel around looking for the biggest beasts to get the bone, and as part of that is they eat the marrow to get the animal's essence and power. They also accidentally kind of get amber as well, apparently, and talks about how they use the amber realm stone to coat the arrow tips and weapons, and use it in a sort of a specific way to make people angry when they get hit by it, and then turn on each other. And so it was really interesting how they kind of use all of that. But they talk about the connection with the land, and that they believe the Gur is alive. And there's again lots of mentions of how it works, and how the continents are slowly devouring the continent that Kragnos came from, and how they're traveling around. The different factions have different goals, and one of them wants to kind of split open Gur and devour parts of its essence for their own power.
Yeah,
so that was interesting.
Yeah. So usually we hit what kind of motivates these guys. We've kind of talked about it quite a bit already. Sort of what drives these different ones. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
We did have one more question here from Ned, who said, "Is a bit curious if there's any major engagements or animosity between the Gorks and the Morks and the Gorka Morkas, and how the Iron Jaws and the others view the Kruleboyz and their tactics." And I think it just comes down to the Kruleboyz are like, we don't want to fight at all. We want to like do everything we can, so when we actually get there, they're just absolutely destroyed. And the Iron Jaws are like, what? It's literally the point of life. Like, the point of life is to go smash things.
Yeah.
And the Bone Splitters are like, why are you fighting unless you're getting power? Like, you go and fight because fighting is cool, right? But like, you want this power, this essence of the bones, and like become bigger and stronger and more believing in what it is that you do. And the Kruleboyz are just like these lazy gits that sit in the swamps and are like, just, I mean, if you're within 5 feet of me, sure, I'll put some effort through and make sure you die in a way that amuses me. Right?
Well, it does say like they're lazy in some aspects, but they'll walk 100 miles to stab you in the back. Like, yes. I think that specific line is in there, so they're motivated for particular things.
Patient.
Yeah, they talk about Iron Jaws. Their intention is to match strength with strength. Like, they want to go up against your toughest. They want you to be at your strongest when they fight you, because that's how they prove they're best. And the Kruleboyz are all about, a fair fight is something that other people do. Like, not them. Like, why would you engage in a fair fight? That's crazy.
They play to win.
Yeah, it's salted all through there. There was a great mini story in there where they're fighting with the Dawnbringer Crusade, and there's some of those floating metalliths, and the Kruleboy character you have the point of view from is watching, and some of the Dawnbringers are firing guns off the top of the metalliths, and he says like, that's cheating. And instead of it being indignant, he's like, that's cheating. He said it approvingly, like, good job, you guys. Like, I'm impressed. Way to cheat. I was like, that's just a nice touch. That's the kind of stuff that kind of makes the lore for me, if you can find that way to lean into their way of thinking. All right.
That reminds me of one of the Big Yellows. It does specifically mention one character who's so famous because he's so good at gambling, and he's got like this gambling ring set up with the animals and everything else.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, because it's one of my favorites. So this is Swamp Boss Scumdreck Gitsnatcha Boss.
Yes.
He has a menagerie of beasts, and they're all predators trapped in mangrove root cages.
Oh, yeah.
He rides Slopclaw, a sludge raker that he captured in his youth, who's like old and blind, but like still the most vicious one. So he's totally going to do that. And he's like an inveterate gambler, but the way he gambles is that he releases captives into his menagerie and then slowly releases some of his pets, and people bet on how long they're going to live.
Yeah.
And then they had the Countin Crew, which is a bunch of hobgrots with a troll who like enforce the rules and cause accidents. And
they're like taking the bets.
And now he's just like massively rich, just inviting people to come and watch everybody get tortured. Oh man, like,
it was hilarious.
Like, oh, this is like what This is straight out of fantasy and sci-fi fiction from the 1950s, 1960s of like just going to try and kill as many people as possible as you hunt them through, right?
Yeah.
Golden gun, all that kind of stuff. So,
Like a Running Man thing.
yeah.
I mean, side note, all these factions and sub-factions, all these sub-factions, they actually explicitly list who the head person is for each of those.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They were like, here's the Wargog shaman that is in charge of this, particular bone splitter tribe. And here's, all that went through. It's like, oh, that adds a little bit more character to each of those. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about. Oh, did we answer this? Gorks versus Morks, how the Iron Jaws view others? Yeah, we kind of addressed that. So, let's talk about how the rules meet the table. So, like, there's a whole bunch. Every unit gets a rundown, and it is prohibitive to go through every single one here.
Yeah.
Why don't you give me your favorite, Paul?
I don't know if it's my favorite because it's like
give me one that you want to talk about, Paul.
Yeah, I know. Because every one is super evil. Like that is the enduring theme, is that every single unit entry are just like dark and evil and mean. So I'm going to talk about the marsh crawler slogoths, which are the those are the Troggoths. So like that's the creepy face one with the grots on the back.
I'm going on all fours. Yeah.
Yep. And it preys on the weak. It eats children intentionally and tries to like find the weakest thing because it's still super lazy, but extremely patient. And just it sounds like the most vile thing ever. So when they capture them, they actually weigh a weight around its neck to make sure it can't stand up, which is why it has to walk on its hands and feet.
Yeah.
This is like, oh, that is super dark.
Yeah. And the other thing that was like effectively creepy about them is they apparently have like weirdly flexible arms. Like, and specifically like,
they talked about putting their hand up an arrow slit.
Yeah, like reached up through a murder hole. It was like one of the blurbs and like managed to mush guys in there. Like you're like, okay, we're safe up. Oh my god, here comes it! Like straight out of a horror movie. Like, gross.
Yeah.
What'd you like out of the Kruleboyz there, Josh?
One thing that we didn't mention in the kind of their background, but they had these scare shields, and the shields have got these faces on them. And it goes through several different sections that describes how they're designed to scare predators in the marsh. So the predators are so dumbwitted that they'll kind of see them and go, "Oh, it's another predator," and they'll kind of leave them alone. But that they use them also to scare people coming into the swamps where they have the fog and the mist, and then humans or other people will be coming into the swamp and they'll see all these faces and they'll be terrified. And they mentioned that the swamp crawlers will also throw psychedelic agents into the mist and the fogs, and then they'll use this bioluminescence on the eyes to make them glow and the shields. And it was a really neat description of how they use these shields to scare predators as well as other people coming into the swamps. Really kind of this boogeyman feel. I thought it was really cool descriptions. But
it was. I really like the combination of all those things. Like basically give your opponent a bad trip. So
yeah.
Yeah, terrify them first before you take them out. Yeah, make them weak. That's all that they're all about.
Yeah. I really liked reading about the Hobgrot Slittas. They're more militaristic. They're more organized. They will, if the Kruleboyz are like paying close attention, then they kind of like keep it tight. And then as soon as they're like looking the other way, they start talking smack about the Kruleboyz. They're still like nasty to each other, backstabbers, but they tighten up in battle, which is interesting. And also, of course, it was fun to have that direct connection to a faction we don't know very much about, and who knows, might become a full blown something. So that was fun. Anybody? Go ahead.
Well, another thing I thought was funny when it talks about the was it Corpse Frippa, the vulture, and how,
Mhm.
how it was caught, but how they live and how they're caught, where they'll kind of dig up the roots of a tree so it kind of dies, but it's
Yeah.
still strong, and then they'll capture something, and then they'll spike it on the branch of the tree, and then they'll
Yeah.
just wait for predators to come and start eating it. And then it'll dive down, grab one of them, eat part of it, and spike it on the tree and repeat the process.
Yeah.
It's just like, ooh, vicious predators in these swamps.
Everybody's got really strong stomachs in this faction because, like,
Yeah.
the
Yep.
vulture wants to like make sure they're nice and juicy, rotting. The Mirebrute Tragas, like they'll kill their prey and then like stuff them in the swamp and just let them fester, like
Till they're soft.
like the opposite of refrigeration. Like take your food and put it in the rottiest area that you can. Like, oh yeah, now it's all soft and gooey. Now
It talks about how the Kruleboyz secrete this oil on their skin too, whether to be slippery to avoid the grasp of predators or because they've just eaten so many frogs and poisons.
Yeah.
It's like, it's already slimy, vile group.
Yeah, there was like they talk about folk heroes a number of times. I think they use that term more than once. Wrapping around to the Kilobosses, there was one Kiloboss who was like particularly cowardly-ish, like kept on kind of scoring the win by being off to the side or whatever. And one of his plans ended up was they downed a Gargant. Or no, am I messing this up? Is this an Ironjaw?
No,
it's Ironjaws. Yep.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Was it?
But yeah,
Now I'm thinking about it. So.
Well, there is actually a story in the Kiloboss entry about a Kiloboss named Bogdrock who trapped a Mega Gargant in a cave with what he called biting stalactites and then sawed its head off while it was prone and then emptied out its skull and used that as a boat to escape from the cavern. I was like,
there's gotta be a better way to get a boat. Like,
it's the folk stories, like you said, is that they gain fame and then it gets passed along.
But the thing I liked about this is that this was one of those stories that you would usually see in the timeline, and that was a super fun little
but yeah, not even the Ironjaws can get away from the gross out stuff. There was what I was thinking of was there was an Ironjaw hero that he was kind of getting in on some of the wins by like jumping at the last minute, like let everyone else do the hard work and then jump up and get the killing blow. And when he gets called out on it, they're like, "Hey, dude, you gotta like toughen up. You need to be part of the killing team. Like, why don't you go get like go to this cavern? There's Mokra. Like, you're gonna lead the hunt on this." He's like, "Yeah, whatever. That sounds fine. I'm too busy to argue with it about it right now, but I'll do that." So then he starts leading the way, and Mokrushes have this big giant bellowing, yell. It's even a rule in the game, right? And so he goes in and like everyone's like, whoa, like getting stunned by how loud this bellow is, and he isn't, because he's thought ahead about it, because disgustingly enough, he's stuffed his ears full of wax, and the wax he got was from the giant they killed the day before. Like, put a giant's earwax in his own ears so that he wouldn't be deaf. And I was like, man, you are gross. And then climbs on the back of the Mokrusha and gets that.
Yep.
Which leads into, we talk about the Gorks. They even refer to them as Goruks and Moruks sometimes. But the thing is, like, you can lead a war clan. Like, its results matter more than how you get there a lot. Like, it's not that it doesn't matter at all, but it even it says, whatever, 4 out of 5 times, like the biggest and the strongest are going to get to the top. But the rest of the time, sometimes just somebody who's clever, and they got their work cut out from them, because they have to be nonstop clever, right? Like, they can't. But it said even to the extent that a grot can end up being in charge, like a clever enough grot, they'll be like, well, if you manage to off the previous guy, you managed to beat the previous guy, you're cunning enough to do it.
Keeping us entertained, and we've always got a fight coming. We'll stick with you.
Yeah, better stay cunning though, because if you don't, so that was I think of that because this was an example of an Ironjaw being particularly cunning. So
exactly.
All right. Any other any Orruk units that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about?
There was one that just because I was unfamiliar with the faction as a whole per se,
Mm-hmm.
but it talked about Ardboys, and I didn't realize this about again the Savage Orcs and the Ardboys apparently are just regular Orcs until something in their life they in terms of the bone splitters, they get infused with Wa energy and can't get rid of it, and then they kind of become a bone splitter. But the Ardboys are just like, I want to be more like that Iron Jaws. I want to be bigger and stronger, and then they just kind of follow them around until they start becoming bigger and stronger. So I didn't realize that, so it was kind of an interesting tidbit that some of them choose a path, or called, so to speak. But
Yep. Yeah. That was in the last book, and I appreciated that a lot. It's a super fun little thing. So I'd like to talk about another unit, but we've kind of already talked a little bit about, but it's Gobsprak, the Mouth of Mork.
Sure.
So we talked about kind of how he rose to prominence, and he is like a now character, as in like after the events of Mortal Realms or Broken Realms Kragnos is when he has come into the narrative. And one of the interesting things is that, as you mentioned before, Davy, he actually takes mementos from the things that he killed. And there was an interesting moment here where it talks about how he went and took the magic mushrooms from Snagsgar Stinkmullet's corpse.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really interesting thing because this is kind of one of my big questions. Is it kind of ties into several of the other questions here. So we have a question from Sever. I guess the only follow-up I have is, if the Kruleboyz have been essentially hiding for years, how did Gobsprak become the Mouth of Mork? Or did it not happen until after they came out of the swamps? And again, because right now, it literally just happened within the last, 10 years in the timeline. But then we have a question from Dark Alec here, is what happened after Excelsis? How angry is Kragnos? Is, quote, he's still a big dum-dum. Those are not my words. Those are Darth Alec's. But it plays into a theme that I feel like I read when I was reading this narrative, is that Gordrak has been the motive force for the Oryx ever since he got a miniature, which was 3 or 4 years ago. And it talks about how he had this meteoric rise from kind of nothing, and then he starts in the Prince of Garantia. He finds the first thing, and then Snazgar tells him to go to the second place, and he's actually defeated by this coalition force of the Stormcast and the Fire Slayers, and they actually bring down the Storm Vault on top of themselves in order to make sure that he can't get the thing in there. Right? And then Snazgar is still like, well, but we can still get it. We just need to stop and dig it out. It's still there. And this is a thing that you need in order to fulfill your mission, right?
Yep.
But then Gordrak kills him because he's just like, I'm done with this. I'm done with all this waiting. I'm done with all of this ridiculousness going on. And when Gordrak finally does make it to Excelsis, he has this like massive, powerful thing that we've had several stories about from the beginning of Age of Sigmar almost. And he runs it into the walls of Excelsis, and it literally just falls apart. So my question is, why did that happen? And I think a lot of the answer that they've talked about this book is how the Orcs have to believe that something is possible for it to be possible. And when Gordrak killed Snazgar, he had the, Gratz stop believing in him. When he comes up against Kragnos, he has the Orcs stop believing that he's the biggest and the baddest, right? It even talks about in the Battletome of, well, Kragnos obviously beat Gordrak, but the Iron Jaws are not actually capable of believing that Kragnos could be stronger because Kragnos is not an Iron Jaw, right? And especially when we have Gobsprak go and take the magic item that made Snazgar, and now is taking that to lead Kragnos. it really feels like we're getting a question and we're getting an exploration of how much does the belief that a thing happens define what's going on. And my question is, because Kragnos beat Gordrak, did the orcs and the orcs couldn't believe in him? Is that what stopped Kragnos from actually destroying Excelsis? Because Gordrak was defeated by Kragnos, could he never have defeated Excelsis with the items because he didn't A, finish the quest, and B, everybody didn't believe that he was this big, strong thing that could destroy the world anymore? And then to kind of like tag on to that, it talks about how he had to basically build up his mojo again by going back to the bits of Garantia. And then it doesn't talk so much about this massive Wa that he has going with him. It talks about having some and then the Spider Fang. So I think if I'm going to have an overarching theme for the Battletome and how it addresses the ongoing narrative, it's really about how much they believe that Gordrak can do these things, how much they believe that Kragnos can do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And Gobsprak is now building up the belief in the Kruleboyz that Kragnos can do whatever he wants. Right? So if that all makes sense, I thought that was a very, very fun exploration in the book, in the Battletome. So,
Yeah, no, and then, as parts of that, it talks about Kragnos and how he became more than mortal because the belief of the orcs had in him, that they thought he was a god, and they followed him and they fought with him, and then eventually he just got more and more powerful as he ate Amber Stone and through their belief. So, it was interesting, and like you said, in terms of Gordrak and then Kragnos both being extremely powerful, and then having followers. That towards the end of the book, when it talks about Gordrak heading into the 8 points, and he's got his large contingent of Spider Fang and Iron Jaws and other orcs who are following him, that it has a small mention that everybody knows Kragnos is brawny, but some believe Gordrak is brawn and cunning, and maybe he's better fit to lead the Great Wa. So it's like, okay, is this setting it up for some sort of civil war or destruction, or is this the two-headed Gorka Morka we got going on here?
Yep.
Where it's going to fight each other and then eventually it'll make up again. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so Gordrak's like, I'm going to go take on Archeon instead, and then I'll get to Azir through that gate because he knows how to do it. So.
So I think Paul kind of did some good summing up there. I think he's got one more kind of grand thought about this. Before we get there, are there any bits and pieces that we haven't touched on? Whether it's to do with Bone Splitters or Iron Jaws or anything, like any bits that you particularly enjoyed from there. I've got a couple, so I'll start with one. I'll give you a chance to think about it, and this could just be like offhand comments that you didn't get a chance to touch on, but you enjoyed. I noticed the Bone Grins, and I read the original Bone Splitters army book, but I don't think I read the in between because there was a combined Iron Jaws Bone Splitters, and so this may be something that got introduced there. But they talked about the Bone Grins sub-faction there putting a lot of amber bone in their arrowheads that were particularly painful for monsters, and it would also get them kind of berserk and pull them in. I kind of expected, I did a skim of the rules, I didn't see anything about that. It was a little bit surprising, so you just kind of have to headcanon that, but that sounded like somebody was setting up a rule that would force a charge or something like that.
Right, yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah, but I didn't see that, but
same with the ice bone. They supposedly had like really cold, freezing Wa arrows. Ice tips weapons that would freeze people and slow them down. But again, no particular rules.
Yeah. So and that's okay. It's fun to have the rules for it, but also like it's fun to not have rules that are so specific that you can't. You know what I mean? Like. It might be fun to paint up your guys' ice bone, and if you have like this huge, powerful rule, I don't know. Anyway, so I thought that was cool. Do you guys have anything else that you wanted to touch on? I had one quote that I really liked, but I'll give you guys a chance here.
I just loved how, even though we already I know I've said it already, but we got to the pointy end of the narrative just 4 months ago, and that we've expanded upon that narrative and moved it forward with the characters that moved the forward 4 months ago in an engaging and really fascinating way, to my mind. So I really appreciated that for sure.
What about you, Josh? Anything else you want to hit?
No, nothing in particular. Go for it, man.
As often is the case, I particularly enjoy the quotes and asides on the little, mini paragraph stories. But there was one quote. I'll read the quote, but it was best for the attribution afterwards. So saying, got enough iron jaws together, you got yourself a mob. Get enough mobs together, you got yourself a fist. Get enough fists together, well, then you got what we call a brawl. See, because there's going to be a good punch up or whatever happens. But when you get the brawls together, when you get the brawls get together, boys, then you got something really special. You got yourself a wah. And then that's attributed to Boss Bakraka accidentally sounding the last charge of Wag Bakraka.
Yeah.
Nobody was listening to them. They just heard the wah at the end and then set off.
Charge. Yeah.
That
was an awesome quote.
On that topic, they did have a pronunciation guide to that wah. It must be pronounced in spittle flying, sinew stretching, throat tearing volumes. The pronunciation guide was not how to form the vowels. It was just how loud it was.
Presentation.
As long as it was loud, you said it right. So I was like, oh, all right, here we go. Yeah. But Paul, you had a good wrap up already. But what else? What's your final thought here on this book?
So I have shared before when we talked about Dominion, I was like, oh, I like the Kruleboyz, but they seem like they're grots to me, right? And you had mentioned something when we were talking about that made me think about it a little bit more. And you were like, well, but it's a new thing, and I like that it's a new thing, and I like that it's pushing the idea of what orcs are, and that's a space that I want them to explore, right? That's what I enjoy. And I agree with you. And so I had to kind of think about what it was that was kind of just making it not quite fit in my head. And I think I finally have come up with an answer. And the answer is that the Kruleboyz range is amazing. All the miniatures are fantastic, right? The background totally makes sense to me, why they are what they are, right? The evilness is it's something that surpasses what a grot would be in my mind, because it is so vindictive. And every single unit in the Kruleboyz are evil. But the thing that really struck me as I was thinking about this is that the Kruleboyz range is like an Orc and Goblin army from 5th edition. And what I mean by that is it literally is almost every model, every unit that we had as an Orc and Goblin army in 5th edition. We had a giant model on a centerpiece, which was the Wyvern with the War Boss, but now we've got the Vulture, right? And you've got a caster, and you've got a fighter. You've got a bunch of grots riding on chariots. You've got poison like they have in the Spider Fang. Everything kind of fits with something that was released there. You even have the Hobgrots, which are very much acting the same as they did in 5th edition. You have these big beasts. The chariots have been replaced by monsters now. But even the common grots had shooters, which are now the crossbows, and then they had bolt throwers, which are now just a single grot holding the bolt thrower. And I love that, because I love when they go back and they take inspiration from models that they've already done. And they especially did that in the design, where they took the models from 1st or 2nd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and brought them into the new design ethos and made some absolutely incredible models. My issue is that when you take that gorgeous new range and then say, but they're just one of the 3 sets of orcs right now, that's where the disconnect happens, because this model range feels like a bit of a reset from what we had before. Nothing kind of looks the same. The grots look different. The orcs look different, which again, I'm totally here for. but especially when they go through with the setting and they talk about the lore and how everything is evil. What I guess I wanted out of it was I wanted the Kruleboyz to have this overarching, crusade, very similar to the Dawnbringer Crusade, which is we're better, we're sneakier. Our mission is to go and wipe out all the rest of the orcs because look at how awesome we are and look at what we can do.
Interesting.
And,
go ahead. I won't.
And so because they just kind of want to stay in the swamps and they seem to be lazy is where the disconnect happens with me, because they feel like the civil war happening right here. And oh my gosh, would I have loved a civil war between orcs and orcs.
Yeah, I mean, orcs fight orcs all the time, right? I think you're not going to get the hey, we need to wipe out the rest, because I think at their core, although you have Morkers and Gorkers and Gorkamorkers, they all know that they serve a twin-headed god. They all come from a twin, so they like, hey, we lean into this, but there's still that other aspect. We'll fight them, but you still like I said, like the results matter more than the methods. I think that's why that's there. So, well, before we go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say one more thing. I thought in the book they did mention, kind of going back to the Kruleboyz and how they're depicted as like bullies and mean and vindictive, but careful planners and patient, because they, the ends justify the means sort of thing. But it did mention that some of the other orcs had mentioned that, maybe the Kruleboyz, they have that glint of Mork in them, but maybe they also have that bitter chaos streak from the corruption of Gur. So maybe that's where a lot of that evil, vindictive behavior comes from, and maybe that was like the orcs. Maybe that's why they are the way they are, but perhaps it is. So I think that was kind of a neat kind of drop, like, oh, maybe they're somewhat tainted, and that's why they're kind of the way they are, instead of just a natural force of destruction. They're a little twisted because of Gur is a little twisted.
Yeah, I missed that. It's right there in the name. They really leaned into the cruel on those guys.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I got a final question for you guys to ponder here. So,
all right.
You gotta be in one of these war clans. Are you an Ironjaw? Are you a Kruleboy? Are you a Bone Splitter? I'll go to Paul first.
I am a Skullbugs Kruleboyz.
Reliable.
Yeah.
Nice.
What about you, Josh?
Oh, that's a great question. I really love the idea of the scare shields. I got to say that, subjecting your victims to psychedelic marsh gases and having them freak out, it just sounds like a lot of fun.
For me, as much as I enjoyed reading about the Kruleboyz, as much as I enjoyed the range, I gotta go back to Bone Splitters. Kruleboyz are just like a little too mean and icky for me. Like
they're super evil.
They're so.
They are.
I mean, yeah, so mean. I just like the exuberance. It feels. I mean, obviously they're doing a lot of like killing and all that sort of thing, but I just like the sort of pure-hearted, exhilarating.
Primal nature,
like they're
primal force of nature, sort of thing.
Just out there having a good time. Those Bone Splitters. So
I
always enjoy that. They always pop up with
magic tattoos. And,
exactly. Dancing and lightning. But before we close out, we do want to say thanks to our patrons. It's very much appreciated. If you want to look into that, you can do so. But very much appreciate the people taking the time, and very much appreciate that people take the time to come chat with us on the Discord. You guys, men and women, boys and girls on there that kind of bring that positive energy. I really appreciate that. It's kind of a great place to go and just catch up with folks. So thanks for we kind of. By we, I mean Aaron set up the framework of what that is, but all the listeners who come and join that kind of have made that the home that it is, and I just wanted to express a little gratitude for that.
For sure.
Yeah,
agreed. It's awesome.
Oop, and I guess before I forget, we do owe some thanks to Games Workshop. They did send us a review copy of this, which we passed around so we could give you this overview and get it out there. So I'm going to leave you guys with this one more thought here.
All right.
This is accompanying a picture of Bone Splitters fighting against Nurgle Rotbringers. They're just thrashing at each other. And your wisdom, your Orruk wisdom for the day is don't eat none of that chaos.
Nice.
It's time for our reforging, but Sigmar willing, we'll be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, leave a review, join us in Discord, drop a tip on our Patreon. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar farther than we can on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter. You can get us at The Mortal Realms. Paul, where can they get you?
At PJ Shard.
Josh, how about you?
At J.E. Arrington.
I'm at red_Zeke. If you want to talk to me or if you want to talk Underworlds, you can get me at WTHcast. And you can find all our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms.com. And I'm a rat. Rough. I'm at. I might have a couple off the cuff questions at the end that are supposed to.
That is your right.
Yeah. And I won't even answer them myself. I got to play the Aaron part to the hilt.